When Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett questioned Melania and Trump's immigration path live on air, she didn't just spark outrage, she cracked open a conversation America had been avoiding for years. It began with the usual political the kind of cable news panel that airs at 8 p.m. with glossy graphics, 2-minute talking points, and for people talking over each other. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was seated second from the left, right beside a conservative strategist with a smug grin and a loud voice who kept hammering her on immigration. The moderator had just asked a question about border security and how political families have influenced immigration narratives in the past. That's when things took a turn. Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned forward, eyes steady, and said, "If we're going to talk about standards for who belongs in this country, maybe we should start with Melania." The table went quiet for a full 3 seconds. Nobody spoke, not even the host, who was usually quick to cut in but seemed caught off guard. The conservative strategist's mouth curled into a grin, as if he'd just been handed a gift. "Are you seriously suggesting the former First Lady should be deported?" he shot back. Jasmine didn't flinch. "I'm saying if we're going to weaponize the word illegals, let's talk about everyone's path. Her modeling visa, her green card, the fast-track process. It's fair game now, right?" The cameras kept rolling. The network didn't cut away. And just like that, the segment shifted from a policy discussion to a cultural flashpoint. A moment later, someone from the production crew whispered something to the host through his earpiece. He quickly tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, but the damage was already done. The clip was already being clipped. Less than 20 minutes after the show aired, the moment had hit Twitter. Someone screen-recorded it, added the caption, "Representative Jasmine Crockett just said Melania and Trump should be deported," and it took off like wildfire. Within the hour, hashtag #Melania started trending, but not on its own. It was paired with hashtag deport Melania and hashtag Jasmine Crockett. Two camps immediately formed. Some were cheering her on. She said what nobody else will say out loud. Double standards in this country are ridiculous. Others were furious. This is racism, plain and simple. She crossed the line. You don't come back from this. Jasmine didn't log on to Twitter that night. Her team had advised her to stay quiet for now, to let the press cool off. But someone had already forwarded her the headlines. She stared at her phone in silence, sitting alone in her apartment in Arlington. There were 3 half-drunk bottles of water on the table and a takeout container she hadn't touched. The comment had slipped out fast, maybe a little sharper than she meant it, but she didn't regret it. Melania and Trump, she thought, has always been protected from the kind of scrutiny everyday immigrants face. Jasmine had seen it up close. Constituents getting detained for missing a court date. Mothers separated from their children over paperwork mistakes. But Melania, she was married to money and moved into the White House. There was a time when Jasmine might have played it safer, but not anymore. She was tired of watching people tiptoe around privilege just because it wore designer heels and carried a European accent. Still, she knew the fallout would be brutal and, she was right, by 11 p.m. A screenshot of her face mid-sentence was posted on Truth Social, Trump's platform, with the words "disgusting. This is who the Democrats are now. Signed simply Donald J. Trump." Right-wing outlets started looping the clip on repeat. Commentators labeled her anti-woman, anti-immigrant, even anti-First Amendment, all for a 15-second comment on live TV. But the conversation was no longer about immigration policy. It had become something else entirely, and that something was about to explode. Donald Trump didn't wait for sunrise. At 11:42 p.m., while most of the country was winding down, his Truth Social post was already circulating on multiple platforms. The font was large, the words in all caps. Jasmine Crockett's attack on Melania is disgusting, racist, and anti-American. This is what the radical left thinks is decent. She should apologize immediately. The post was shared over 25,000 times in the first hour. Screenshots were posted to Instagram, reshared on Facebook, clipped into 30-second reaction videos on TikTok, and turned into thumbnails for YouTube rants with titles like "Democrats have lost their minds. When did it become okay to deport the First Lady?" The right-wing media machine kicked into gear. At 12 a.m., a Fox News anchor opened their midnight segment with the line, "Tonight, we're witnessing one of the most disrespectful, divisive attacks ever launched on a First Lady by a sitting member of Congress, no less." By 1 a.m., Marjorie Taylor Greene had weighed in, calling for Jasmine's censure. "She's unfit to serve," Greene wrote. "This woman just said Melania and Trump should be deported. This is dangerous hate speech." From the other side, there was silence. Most Democrats hadn't said anything yet. A few progressives liked tweets supporting Jasmine's comment but stopped short of posting anything themselves. Meanwhile, conservative influencers, podcasts, and YouTube commentators were having a field day. One of the first videos to hit 1 million views came from a guy in Scottsdale, Arizona, wearing an American flag tank top and pacing in his garage. "This is why the left keeps losing people," he shouted into the camera. "You come for Melania, who literally followed the rules, by the way, and you make her the bad guy. Where does this end? Are we gonna deport Canadians next?" But the real problem wasn't the rigid, was the shape of it. The way people twisted Jasmine's words into something they were never meant to be. She never said, "Deport Melania." That part had been added by the internet, repeated, framed, amplified, and now believed. Her actual line, "Maybe we should start with Melania," was already being shortened, paraphrased, and repackaged into a different narrative. And that narrative had heat. At 6 a.m., a segment on a conservative morning show featured a still image of Jasmine Crockett next to the text, "Democrat calls for deporting former First Lady." No quotes, no clarification, just assertion. And by then, millions of viewers had already seen it. Back in Washington, Jasmine's team was scrambling. Her chief of staff, Leo Mercer, had barely slept. He'd spent most of the night watching the story spiral across timelines and news feeds. At 7:03 a.m., he called Jasmine. "We need to talk about messaging." Jasmine was already awake, sitting at her kitchen counter with a legal pad in front of her. On it, she'd scribbled out 2 columns, one titled Truth, the other Noise. Under Truth, she had written, "I didn't say deport. Hypocrisy is real. I'm not apologizing." Leo was calm but firm. "We're losing control of this. The internet thinks you said something you didn't say. So let's remind them what I did say," she replied. "That only works if they're willing to hear it. Right now, they're not. This is fire, Jazz." She stayed quiet for a beat. "I'm not walking it back. Leo, if I do, they win. And if I don't, they'll try to bury me anyway," he sighed. "Then we better figure out how to talk about it on purpose, not just in response." By 8 a.m., 3 staffers had gathered in Jasmine's apartment, laptops open, phones buzzing. They started drafting a statement, but Jasmine stopped them. "No press release," she said. "If I say anything, I say it myself and I say it live." "But we can't control the questions," one aide replied. "That's the point," she said. "I don't need a safe space. I need the truth to breathe." By mid-morning, Jasmine had agreed to appear on a live morning show, the next day a big one, national audience, high stakes. She knew it wouldn't be friendly, but that's exactly why she chose it, because something bigger was happening now. This wasn't just about her or Melania anymore. This was about how quickly America turns outrage into a storyline no matter the facts, and Jasmine was about to walk right into the center of it, but behind the public firestorm. A deeper story was quietly unraveling, one that Melania and Trump hadn't spoken about in years. Melania Nos came to the United States in 1996. She was 26 years old, Slovenian-born and trying to make it as a model in New York. At the time, she was on what's called an EB-1 visa, nicknamed the Einstein visa, meant for people with extraordinary ability. Some say she qualified, others still argue she didn't. The truth, it's murky. Back then, the modeling industry thrived on exclusivity and connections. Melania had both. She worked with top photographers, graced runways, and started dating a real estate mogul named Donald Trump just 2 years after landing in the States. By 2001, she had a green card. By 2006, she was a citizen. That path, while technically legal, has long raised eyebrows, not because she broke laws, but because it was, by any measure, unusually smooth. Her visa type was rare for someone without global recognition. Her green card came faster than most, and her path to citizenship was faster than what many of her now husband's critics call the normal line. But Melania didn't give many interviews about her immigration status. She's always been guarded, poised, present, but quiet, and that silence, intentional or not, made her an easy symbol. To her supporters, she's the American dream, immigrant turned first lady who stayed elegant, loyal, and above the noise. To her critics, she's the double standard personified, a woman who benefited from the very system her husband condemned, then stayed quiet while he tore that same system down. Jasmine Crockett knew all this. She knew the history, the contradictions, the way immigration is judged harshly for some and handled gently for others. And she knew the moment she mentioned Melania on live TV, the reaction wouldn't be about facts, it would be about perception. Meanwhile, in Palm Beach, the woman at the center of the storm said nothing. Melania Trump was at Mar-a-Lago the morning after Jasmine's comment exploded. Sources close to the family said she was aware of the controversy but not planning to comment. She hadn't been on camera in weeks. That wasn't unusual, but the silence was loud. Some say she was hurt, others say she was annoyed. A few in Trump's circle reportedly urged her to respond directly. She declined to engage. She won't lower herself, one advisor told a reporter off the record. The belief was clear it was beneath her. Yet, despite her refusal to respond, the online digging had already begun. Activists, journalists, and political youth were pulling apart every immigration form, every archived quote, and every public record from her time as a model. One clip resurfaced from 2016, a short interview on CNN where Melania Trump insisted she had always followed the rules. It was a line she repeated often, but the details had always been hard to verify. Her early visa records were never made public, and her timeline didn't quite match standard immigration processing times. For Trump's base, however, it didn't matter. They weren't interested in immigration law. They were focused on something else entirely. The audacity of criticizing a former First Lady. She's graceful, elegant, and came here the right way, one caller told a conservative radio host in Phoenix. That Congresswoman is just jealous. But others weren't so quick to dismiss the question Jasmine Crockett had raised. On an independent political podcast based in Columbus, Ohio, the host, an immigration lawyer named Hugo Merin, broke down Melanian's history in plain terms. This isn't about kicking Melanian out, Hugo said. It's about pointing out how some people get to glide through the system while others get torn apart by it. He paused, then added, let's be honest, if Melania had come here as a single black woman from Ghana, married a broke construction worker, and applied for an EB-1 visa, she wouldn't have made it past the first interview. That clip started circulating quietly at first, then faster. It found its way into group chats, was stitched into TikTok videos, and turned into quotes on Twitter. The question wasn't just whether Melania should be deported. It had evolved into why we accept different rules depending on who someone marries or what they look like. While Trump supporters continued to rage at Jasmine's comment, more people began to examine the point beneath the noise. The story was shifting again, but inside Jasmine's office in D.C., things weren't shifting, they were spiraling. And not everyone on her team agreed on what to do next. Leo Mercer had barely touched his coffee when the second intern of the morning started crying. It was 9 a.m. in Jasmine Crockett's D.C. office, and the phones were ringing off the hook. The media inbox was flooded. Fox News had just run another segment quoting her out of context, and her name was being mentioned every 6 minutes on national cable. The building's front desk called twice to report that someone had left a cardboard sign taped to the glass, "Deport racists. Crockett is the real threat." Inside, it wasn't any calmer. Her staff, a mix of Hill veterans and young progressives, were split down the middle. Some panicked, others defiant. Leo stood in the middle of the room, sleeves rolled up, his tie askew, trying to keep the day from becoming a disaster. "We can't keep reacting," he told the room. "Right now we're letting them control the story." A junior aide chimed in, "Then let's hit back." She said what she meant, so let's say it again, clearer, louder. Another staffer shook her head. "This isn't just a policy fight anymore. This is tribal now. We're getting death threats." Leo's phone buzzed again. He didn't even check it. He rubbed his forehead. "We need a direction, not another tweet." And then Jasmine walked in. She looked tired but clear-eyed, no makeup, a navy blazer over a white tee. Her phone was in her hand. The screen opened to a message she hadn't replied to yet from a longtime mentor telling her to apologize. She tossed the phone onto the table and said flatly, "I'm not walking anything back." The room went still. Someone exhaled, another looked down at their laptop, and a few nodded silently. Leo stepped toward her. "Jazz, we're not asking you to walk it back, but maybe we frame it differently. Highlight the double standard without mentioning Melania again." Jasmine sat down. "That's the problem, Leo. The double standard is Melania." He didn't disagree, but strategy demanded nuance. "There's a difference between making a point and making an enemy," he said. She leaned back, arms crossed. "He made me the enemy the second I opened my mouth." A silence hung between them. One of the interns, Jamila, nervously raised her hand from across the table. She was 22, just out of Howard, and in her first year working in politics. She'd stayed quiet all morning. "I know this probably doesn't matter," she said softly, "but my mom cried when she saw that clip," she said. "Finally, someone said what we've all been thinking." Jasmine looked at her just for a moment. That was all she needed. "This isn't about Melania," she said. "It's about who gets judged, who gets forgiven, and who gets told to go back." Leo cleared his throat. "We need to be ready for what's next. Trump's team is already prepping their counter. If he smells blood, he'll go after more than just your words. He already is, Jasmine replied. They're digging into my personal life, my campaign records, my bar filings. Someone from Newsmax called my sister. Everyone in the room stiffened. Leo stepped forward. Then we go first. Don't just defend lead. If you're taking this heat, make it count. Say the hard things out loud, and make it so clear they can't twist it. Jasmine nodded slowly. Then book the morning interview. Big one. And tell them I'm not reading a statement live, Leo asked. Liv, she confirmed. Someone in the back whispered, she's going in without a script. Jamila spoke again. She is the script. Everyone turned toward her. For the first time that morning, the room didn't feel like it was falling apart. It felt like something was about to shift. Outside, the noise kept building new headlines. More outrage. Every word Jasmine had said the night before was being played back, reframed, repackaged. But inside, something else was happening. They weren't backing down. They were preparing to speak louder. But across the country, in a downtown LA studio, a different kind of storm was brewing because Jasmine was about to go live and the questions waiting for her were loaded and brutal. The lights were unforgiving, the kind that made your skin shine and every blink feel like a reaction. Jasmine sat in the studio chair, mic clipped to her lapel, hands folded in her lap. Across from her, seated comfortably and rehearsed, was Elise Doran, a veteran journalist known for her sharp questions and colder follow-ups. They were live on America Morning Focus, a national show with nearly 4 million viewers. Elise started soft. Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for joining us. Jasmine gave a tight nod. Thanks for having me. No small talk, no handshake. Elise didn't waste time. We've all seen the clip, and I want to give you the chance to clarify. Did you call for Melania and Trump to be deported? Jasmine didn't blink. No, I didn't say deport. What I said was, if we're going to judge who belongs in this country, let's stop pretending some people are above scrutiny. Elise cocked her head slightly. You do understand, though, how that sounded to a lot of Americans. Yes, Jasmine replied. I understand it hit people, and maybe that's good because what I said forced a lot of people to ask why. Melania's immigration story is off limits, while others, especially those who look like me, get torn apart over missing documents. Elise pressed harder. Some are calling your comment anti-immigrant, even racist. And yet, Jasmine said, I'm the daughter of immigrants. My father came here on a student visa. My mother cleaned offices at night. Nobody handed us a shortcut. I'm not anti-immigrant, I'm anti-hypocrisy. There was a pause. Elise glanced at her notes. So you're saying Melania and Trump benefited from a double standard? I'm saying her path deserves the same questions we ask poor, our own, undocumented women who've been here for 20 years and still get handcuffed at traffic stops. The control room behind glass was buzzing. Producers were giving signals. Viewers were flooding the network's social media. One of them held up a small sign to Elise's left. 10 seconds to push. Elise leaned in. So let's be director. You standing by your comments? I'm standing by the point behind them, Jasmine said. This country is full of people who get judged by their accent, their skin, their name. But if your name is Trump or you marry into money, you glide through the cracks. If saying that out loud makes people uncomfortable, then maybe it's time they got uncomfortable. Elise blinked. That wasn't rehearsed. That wasn't me. It was raw, clear, and now it was out there. The segment ended 5 minutes later. Jasmine stood up, thanked the crew, and walked off without saying another word. The clip hit social media within minutes. A hashtag began trending by lunchtime. Hashtag double standard debate. Her delivery was steady. Her tone never rose. She didn't backtrack, but she didn't inflame either. Still, the response was a whirlwind. Conservative commentators called it gas. One headline read, Crockett defends anti-Melanian smear with word salad. But others saw something else. Clips of her response began circulating on TikTok, mostly shared by young activists and immigration advocates. One stitched Jasmine's words with images of families detained at the southern border. Another used her soundbite over a photo slideshow of immigrants who had been deported for non-violent offenses. In Tucson, a high school civics class spent the morning discussing the interview. A student raised her hand and asked, why? Does everyone care more about how she said it than why she said it? In that moment it was clear Jasmine had started something, not a scandal, but a conversation. Back in D.C., her staff watched the segment in silence. They didn't cheer, they didn't panic, they just watched. When it ended, Jamila turned to Leo. She was better live than anything we could have written. Leo nodded slowly. And now it's out of our hands. By early evening, cable news was split. One channel called her reckless. Another aired a split-screen debate titled, "Was Jasmine Crockett telling the truth?" But for the first time in 24 hours, Jasmine wasn't on defense. She was holding her ground, but public opinion is rarely stable, and across kitchen tables, newsrooms, and barbershops, the country was starting to weigh in ways no one saw coming. By noon the next day, the country wasn't just watching, was talking. In Dallas, an Uber driver tuned in to talk radio between rides. One caller said Jasmine should be impeached. The next said she should be president. The driver shook his head and turned the volume down. His mother had waited 9 years for her green card, working 3 jobs in the meantime. He'd never cared for politics, but this felt personal. In a Detroit diner off I-94, 2 middle-aged women sat across from each other with their coffee growing cold. One leaned in and whispered, "She wasn't wrong, you know." Her friend looked around before answering, "Maybe not, but that's not how you say it." That was the new dividing line, not just whether Jasmine was right, but whether she had said it the right way. News channels brought on guests who were either angry, exasperated, or confused. They spoke over each other. They cherry-picked quotes. They smiled while they framed her as radical or brave, depending on the channel. The country wasn't reacting to what was said. It was reacting to how it felt. Some felt threatened. Some felt seen. In Jackson, Mississippi, a janitor named Troy Jenkins listened to the clip on his phone during his lunch break. His cousin had been deported in 2017 after living in the US for 14 years. Troy watched the video 3 times, then texted it to his cousin with a short message. "She just said the thing we've been screaming." In Los Angeles, at a coffee shop near Pico Union, 3 college students debated the clip loudly enough for the next table to listen in. One argued Jasmine's point was valid. Another said she should have made it without naming Melania. The third said, "Y'all always want black women to speak politely when we're pointing out the truth." Meanwhile, conservative groups organized fast. One PAC dropped a targeted ad by Friday afternoon, using Jasmine's face in black and white footage with eerie music in the background. The narrator's voice warned, if they can say this about a former First Lady, the backlash wasn't universal. On a small AM station out of Des Moines, an older white Vietnam veteran named Gary called in and said, "She just said the system's broken, we all know it. We just don't like how it sounds when someone puts it that plain." Even late-night hosts picked it up. One cracked a joke about Melania being deported and Trump asking for a return policy. The audience laughed, but the moment lingered because, for every joke, there was someone watching who didn't think it was funny. At a middle school in Tempe, Arizona, an 8th-grade teacher used Jasmine's interview to start a class discussion about fairness. One student asked if the First Lady really could be deported. Another said, "My aunt had to go back to Mexico just because her husband died and her paperwork changed. Why didn't they let her stay?" These were real stories, real families, real confusion. Jasmine's words had cracked open something raw. She'd touched on a truth so many Americans live, but so few talk about, that justice, immigration, and even humanity often depend on who you are and who you're married to. In Miami, a Haitian American pastor preached on Sunday about truth spoken without armor. He didn't name Jasmine directly, but his meaning was clear. Sometimes truth walks in without a filter, he said, and the world calls it rage. The internet was a war zone of opinions. Comment sections turned toxic, and friendships were tested. One Reddit thread about the controversy reached 18,000 comments in less than 12 hours. The top-voted post read, "If you're more offended by the delivery than the double standard she exposed, you're part of the problem." But not everyone online was fighting. Some were listening. They were reading the back and forth, watching the interviews, revisiting old articles about Melania's immigration path, and coming to quiet conclusions. Some even admitted, "I never thought about it that way before." And that's what Jasmine's staff began to notice. For all the noise, there was momentum not just among activists or pundits, but among regular people, families, students, workers. Even a few journalists who had initially condemned her were starting to revise their tone. Jasmine hadn't shifted the political world overnight, but she had pushed the needle just enough. But Donald Trump doesn't let a needle move without shoving it back. And by the end of the day, he was preparing his next strike, one that would turn this into an even uglier fight. By sunset that Sunday, Trump had gone quiet, too quiet. His morning rants had slowed. His team hadn't posted in hours, and the usual media surrogates who parroted his every thought were holding back. For a man who normally filled headlines by the hour, it felt like the calm before something sharp. Then, at 6:38 p.m., a post hit Truth Social. Let's talk about Jasmine Crockett's bar record, shall we? The words didn't need context. His followers pounced. The implication was enough. By 7 o'clock, screenshots of Crockett's old bar association filings were circulating, most of them outdated or irrelevant, but conveniently cherry-picked. A missed continuing legal education deadline from years ago. A fine that had already been resolved. Nothing illegal, nothing unethical, but spun the right way. It looked dirty. A conservative blog ran the headline. Crockett's history of violations raises questions about her judgment. No context, no clarification, just the framing. Within the hour, another narrative was born. She wasn't just attacking Melania, she was a fraud herself. Jasmine's team had seen it coming. Leo leaned over the conference table, eyes locked on a spreadsheet of media hits. This is what he does. He can't win the argument, so he smears. Jamila slammed her hand down, and the media loves it. They're already running with this bar record nonsense like it means something. Jasmine stood near the window, looking out at the city skyline. They're trying to distract from the truth. They're trying to break your credibility, Leo replied. You poke the king, and the king sends the dogs. She turned around, calm but firm. Then we don't give them more blood. We show people who I am. Her phone buzzed again this time. It wasn't a staffer or journalist, but her younger brother Malik. You okay? He asked immediately. I'm good, she said, keeping her voice even. I've seen your name on 3 screens today. Mama's freaking out. Jasmine smiled. Tell Mama I've got it handled. But Malik's voice lowered. Sis, they're not just talking politics anymore. They're digging into your life. Don't let this wreck you. She paused. It won't. After hanging up, she turned to Leo. Town hall this week. Not press, not pundits, real people. Leo raised an eyebrow. You want a live audience now? I want them, the folks who know what this feels like. I don't care if it's messy. Let them hear it straight from me. Across town, Trump's advisors were already briefing their media allies with talking points. They were preparing a segment for Monday Morning Radio 1 that labeled Jasmine as corrupt, inexperienced, and anti. They were stacking the deck, but Jasmine wasn't playing their game. She'd already made her choice. No denials, no distractions. She wasn't running from her own history because it wasn't the story. It never was. What mattered was why. Her words hit so many nerves, and whose version of America people wanted to defend. But the smear campaign wasn't just digital. That same evening, someone emailed a doctored photo of Jasmine at a college party to several reporters, implying drug use, though nothing in the image actually showed that. It was old, grainy, clearly staged, but it didn't matter. To Fringe sites ran it anyway. She laughed when Leo showed her. They're throwing everything, he said. And missing, she replied. This isn't about me, it's about what I exposed. Still, it wore on her. That night, alone in her apartment, she stared at the ceiling for over an hour before falling asleep. She thought about her parents, who had worked 2 jobs each just to afford a down payment on a home. She thought about the families in her district who had buried loved ones during deportations. She thought about how many times she'd been told to watch her tone in meetings where white colleagues raised their voices and no one blinked. And she thought about Melania and Trump, not with anger, with curiosity. Did she ever have to sit through this kind of scrutiny? Did she ever have to answer for what her presence meant? Probably not. And that was the point. But the next day, just when it seemed like things couldn't twist any further, a voice from Melania's own past surfaced, and it wasn't what anyone expected. It started with a tweet, no fanfare, no PR filter, just a short message from a verified account few had noticed before. I worked with Melania during her early days in New York. You all might want to hear what I have to say. It's not what you think. Zoe Ramirez. Nick. The tweet had barely a few hundred likes at first until someone linked her name to a long-forgotten Elle magazine spread from 1997. Zoe Ramirez, a Puerto Rican-American fashion stylist who once worked the Manhattan modeling circuit, had collaborated with Melania on several early jobs before the Trump name, before the politics, before the First Lady dresses. Later that day, Zoe went live on Instagram. No ring light, no makeup. Just a woman in her mid-50s sitting on a couch in Queens with a steady voice and a tired kind of truth. I've been quiet for years, and I'm not here to protect anyone, she said. But I'm also not here to lie. Melania wasn't some villain, but let's be real. She got treated differently from the moment she stepped off the plane. She was tall, thin, European, spoke 5 languages. People bent the rules for her. The comments poured in, some defensive, some grateful, some furious. I helped her get her first real job here, Zoe continued. The agency didn't want to process her paperwork the usual way because it took too long. They had someone who knew a guy at immigration. Things got fast-tracked. No big secret, that's how the industry works for the right people. She paused, looked into the camera. Melania didn't cheat the system. The system just bent itself around her. The clip exploded within hours. Zoe's video had been reposted on TikTok, stitched into reaction videos, subtitled in Spanish, and reposted on left-leaning platforms across the internet. CNN ran a segment titled, "Former Colleague Speaks, Melanian's Modeling Days and the Loopholes of Privilege." Even some moderate conservatives paused. They didn't defend Zoe, but they didn't dismiss her either. The right-wing blogs tried to dig into her background, accusing her of bias, of exaggerating, of trying to take down the former First Lady for clout. But the damage was done because it wasn't an attack, it was confirmation, not from a politician, not from a pundit, but from someone who had been there. And it wasn't just what Zoe said, it was how she said it. Calm, personal, not angry, just honest. In DC. Jasmine watched the video in silence, earbuds in, phone resting on her desk. She didn't smile, she didn't speak. But Leo saw her exhales low and deep for the first time in 2 days. Zoe's words had done what Jasmine's couldn't. They broke through the noise. Later that night, a new post appeared on Jasmine's Instagram story, just text. White letters on black. The truth doesn't need a spotlight, it just needs a witness. It wasn't a direct response to Zoe's video, but the message was clear. Anyone paying attention knew what it meant. Zoe declined interviews that week. She refused to go on TV. When a journalist from The New Yorker asked her about it, she replied, "I'm not trying to be a hero. I just got tired of people pretending the system's fair." Her clip reached over 12 million views by Friday. People who had been on the fence, those who didn't love Trump but had flinched at Jasmine's original comment, began re-evaluating their stance. Some apologized in her DMs. Some reshared her original interview. Others started pointing to Zoe's video in arguments online as proof that maybe this wasn't about Melania at all. Jasmine's team met that night and agreed the strategy would stay the same. No overplaying, no victory laps. They would just keep telling the truth and let it settle. But it wasn't over. The heat was still simmering. Trump wasn't finished. His team was already crafting the next attack line, something bigger, louder, meant to drown everything else out, and it was going to come face to face with Jasmine sooner than she expected. The Hyatt Regency in downtown Dallas wasn't ready for what was about to unfold. The annual American Values Summit was already known for drama, big speakers, big donors, a lot of loud applause, and quiet money. But no one expected Jasmine Crockett and Donald Trump to be in the same building, not this week, not after everything that had happened. Their teams had been booked for separate panels on different days and in different rooms. On paper, there was no overlap. But everything changed when Trump's team pulled a last-minute switch. He would now close the second night with a fireside-style conversation in ballroom at the same space Jasmine had just wrapped her keynote in less than an hour earlier. Some said it was a coincidence, others said it was deliberate. Jasmine was standing backstage chatting with a local organizer when Leo rushed in, holding his phone. "He's here," he said. She raised an eyebrow. Leo showed her the screen live video of Trump walking through the side entrance, waving to a crowd that had already started chanting. She didn't react. She just picked up her purse and said quietly, "Let's not be in the hallway when they come through." But they didn't make it far. Outside the green room, in a carpeted hallway near the escalators, 2 security details clashed her team and his as they crossed paths heading in opposite directions. And then it happened. Trump appeared from around the corner, surrounded by staff, walking fast. Jasmine, trying to leave through the side exit, was suddenly face to face with him just 10 feet apart. He stopped. So did she. For a few seconds, nobody said a word. Reporters weren't supposed to be there, but someone had a phone out. A shaky live stream began. The comments started pouring in before the feed even stabilized. Then Trump raised his voice just enough to carry, "Well, if it isn't the congresswoman who wants to deport my wife," he said. Jasmine didn't flinch. "You're still twisting quotes to stay relevant," she shot back. His expression shifted, smug but tense. "I heard you're doing interviews now," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "You people love the spotlight, don't you?" That phrase "you people" hung in the air like a bad smell. Jasmine stepped forward, calm and clear. "You can post all you want, smear all you want, but the people saw it. They heard what I said, and deep down you heard it too." He chuckled, but his eyes narrowed. "What I heard was hate. What I saw was someone attacking my family because they can't win a real argument." "No," she said sharply. "What you saw was someone telling the truth without asking permission." By now the hallway was packed. Security was pushing. Back on Lookers, staffers were trying to pull both parties away. Someone from Trump's side whispered into his ear, urging him to move. But he lingered 1 second longer and said, "You've got no respect, no class, just like your party." Jasmine smiled, not kindly. Says the man who paid hush money to a porn star and tried to overturn an election. The air went still, phones were up, comments flooded in. The clip would be viral in 10 minutes flat. Trump's face stiffened. Then he walked away without another word. Leo touched Jasmine's arm. "You okay?" She exhaled slowly. "I'm fine." By midnight, the clip had hit 5 million views. Some called her reckless, others called her fearless. Cable news, split screens lit up with analysts dissecting the moment like it was a sporting event. One anchor said it was the political face-off of the year. Another called it pure theater. But for the people watching at home, the ones who'd seen too many fake smiles and safe answers, it was different. It felt real. Two people, no script, no filter, and for once, no middleman. It didn't solve anything. It didn't end the fight, but it peeled back the curtain. The confrontation wasn't just between Jasmine and Trump, it was between two versions of America, cliched and filtered, loud, and impossible to ignore. But when the noise settled, only one question remained. Did the truth land, or did the outrage win? Monday morning came with a silence only exhaustion brings. No breaking tweets. No new video clips. Just millions of Americans sitting with what they'd witnessed over the past 5 days. Jasmine Crockett didn't go live. She didn't post. She didn't grant interviews. Instead, she sat on the back patio of a friend's house in Fort Worth, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and staring out over a quiet backyard. Her phone buzzed every few minutes, notifications, media requests, texts from people she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored them all. The confrontation with Trump had stolen headlines again, the moment when two worldviews collided in one hallway, with every camera catching the pause, the posture, the heat in the words. But to Jasmine, the story was no longer about that moment. It was about what came after. Across the country, people weren't just arguing anymore. They were reflecting in classrooms, pastors, sermons, dinner table conversations, even in detention centers. People were asking themselves, was Jasmine wrong to say what she said, or were we just uncomfortable because she said it too clearly? That was the dilemma, not the message, but the delivery. Because Jasmine's words hadn't been soft. They hadn't been cleaned up. They hadn't come from a consultant-approved teleprompter or been tested in focus groups. They came from experience, from the frustration of watching how two people can walk to completely different paths through the same system, one held to every rule, the other floated through by proximity to power. She knew her tone challenged people. She also knew if she'd said the same words with a smile and a softer pitch, they would have been ignored or worse, dismissed. Meanwhile, Melania and Trump still hadn't said a word. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than most statements. To her supporters, it was proof of dignity. To her critics, it was confirmation of indifference. But either way, she remained untouched. And that was the lesson in America. Sometimes, the louder you speak truth, the more brutal the reaction, especially if you don't fit the mold of who's allowed to speak it. Jasmine's staff knew this. They'd been managing threats all week, filtered through DC, police recorded and documented. A voicemail said she should be sent back to Africa, even though she was born in Ohio. A handwritten letter slipped under the office door called her a disgrace to women. But alongside the hate came something else. Notes, emails, messages from across the country, from immigrants who said thank you, from young girls who said, finally, someone that looks like me isn't scared to speak up, from quiet corners of America where people had never heard of Jasmine Crockett until now and suddenly couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. She hadn't just started a fight. She'd forced a reckoning. Back in Fort Worth, Jasmine looked up as Leo walked onto the patio with his laptop under one arm and a folded newspaper in the other. "You made the front page," he said, handing her the paper. The headline wasn't what she expected, truth or trouble. Crockett raises questions we still don't want to answer. She read it twice. Then she asked, "You think I did the right thing?" Leo took a moment. "You said something real. You said it without dressing it up. That's rare and it's dangerous. But yeah, sometimes the truth's worth the bruises." She looked down at the mug in her hands. It was empty. "Then we keep going," she said quietly. "Because I didn't start this for a headline. I said it because I've watched too many people get crushed by rules that only apply to them." He nodded. "You didn't say it perfect, but you said it honest." And that, in the end, was the moral of the story. In a country obsessed with image, spin, and soundbites, Jasmine Crockett reminded people that truth doesn't always come wrapped in politeness. Sometimes it comes raw, direct, flawed, and necessary. The real question isn't whether she should have said it, it's why it shook people so deeply in the first place. Because maybe the discomfort wasn't about the words. Maybe it was about what those words forced people to confront. And if that kind of truth still scares us, maybe we're not as free as we claim to be. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to not miss out on top-tier analyzers of politics and justice. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring showdowns that change how the world sees